for your presentation today to us. Thank you for
Thank you, David. And thank you for that video. That is not the first time I've seen that video, and I still tear up every time that I see it. Like David said, I'm Amber Allen, and I'm a Human Development and Family Science Field Specialist with the University of Missouri Extension. I am also housed in Greene County in Springfield and share an office with David. And I'm happy to be here today talking about reducing loneliness through social connection. I know people hear the word loneliness and they think this is going to be they probably think of the gray rain cloud. That is not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about how to get rid of the gray cloud and make sunshine in your neighborhood by making those social connections with your neighbors. So today we're going to talk about how to build those connections and relationships, but also how to reduce loneliness. And I feel to really know what that looks like, we need to know some definitions, because a lot of times we use loneliness and social isolation kind of interchangeably, and they're not necessarily the same. So loneliness is feeling of being alone regardless of the amount of social contact. So maybe you have social contacts, but you still feel lonely. So you can have neighbors who are lonely, but you can also have neighbors who are in social isolation. And this is a lack of social connections. And social isolation can lead to loneliness. So being socially isolated can move you into that loneliness category. However, some others can feel lonely without being socially isolated. So basically, these definitions are telling you, when I'm talking about building relationships, it's not just with the neighbor that lives alone. They might be social isolated and lonely, but the neighbor next door might also be lonely that might have a few social connections or more. So making sure that you're reaching out and having social connections and that feeling of belonging to a group and feeling close to other people in your neighborhood. So that's the definition of social connection. So why are we talking about loneliness and social isolation today? Well, sadly, it is common. A report from the National Academics of Science, Engineering, and Medicine points out more than 1/3 of adults age 45 and older feel lonely, and nearly 1/4 of adults age 65 and older are considered to be socially isolated. Older adults are at increased risk for loneliness and social isolation because they face additional factors such as living alone, the loss of family and friends, chronic illness, and hearing loss. So that can be increased risk factors to feeling lonely. So I want to picture your neighbors in your community that you live in. Do any of them fit in these categories? And think, do you have a relationship with this neighbor like in the video? Have you started that social connection process? And I'm sure some of you are saying yes, others might be saying no, but how do I do that? Good thing is I will be talking about that later. Because loneliness is a common experience. 15 to 30% of the general population state that they have a chronic state of loneliness in some research studies that have recently came out. And left untreated, loneliness has serious consequences, both for your mental health and emotional health, but also your physical health as well. There's a lot of research that's came out and showing loneliness having connection to different types of health concerns. So it is hard to measure social isolation and loneliness precisely, but there's strong evidence that many adults age 50 and older are socially isolated or lonely in ways that put their health at risk. Got ahead of myself. So research has showed that social isolation significantly increases a person's risk for premature death, a risk that may rival that of smoking, obesity, or physical inactivity. One research study stated, and that social isolation is associated with about 50% increased risk of dementia. So both of those are health risks that have been associated with loneliness. Two other effects of loneliness have been associated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. And this next one is bolded because this is where we fit in as neighbors. poor social relationships that are characterized by social isolation and loneliness have a 29% increased risk of heart disease and 32% increased risk of stroke. So if you have poor social relationships associated with social isolation and loneliness, you can have increase of heart disease and stroke. I feel like I said that too fast the first time, so I felt like I need to reiterate this because this is where we're going to. Because as neighbors, we can help build social relationships and social connections to help decrease this risk. So what I want to say is each of us are capable of feeling lonely, and loneliness, it might not just be, you might have a stereotype you think would fit this category. Loneliness can affect everyone. And it's really that social disconnection and that hunger for that social connection that motivates us to form those social connections. And they're actually a form of survival to make those social connections. And so feelings of loneliness generally actually reduce individuals' willingness to make social connections. So it's our job, if you think someone is showing signs of social isolation or loneliness, that we are those connectors. Maybe they just moved here and relocated, and so they're having loneliness from their old neighbors, and or maybe they're a grieving widow who is still trying to figure out how to go through their day-to-day, and so they're having loneliness due to a loss in the family. And so they're really not having that motivation to reconnect, but it's something that they need. And so as a neighbor or a friend, we can reach out and start that social connection process. So there are 4 types of ways that research has shown to intervene on loneliness. I'm only going to highlight 2 today, and that is because that's where I feel others play a role in these interventions and that we can do our part. And those 2 are providing social support. So providing social support is exactly what we saw in that video. These are when neighbors are best suited for tasks that are because of proximity. They're close. Maybe it's shoveling a neighbor's driveway right now. Maybe you're in closer proximity than the person that usually does them, their caregiver that usually does it, or the immediacy. Maybe it's something that needs to be done right away. Maybe they've fallen and you're the only contact they can get to. Or, maybe they need someone to care for their child quickly because they got a call into work. And then emergencies. You're going to be those first people there in an emergency. If you see or hear something, you're going to be one of the first people. And then another way we can provide social support, which we saw in that video, is caregiving. We don't think about that a lot as a neighbor. But if you know that one of your neighbors is on oxygen or on some sort of medical device that may need additional care. For example, here in this area, we had potential for losing power in the last couple days. And we were seeing a lot of that information on social media. And so me and my husband made sure neighbors or individuals we knew that didn't have social media were receiving phone calls, especially those who had healthcare needs that would need electricity. So just being aware of what your neighbor might need. And you'll know that by developing positive relationships, which we'll talk about later. The next is increasing opportunities for social interaction. And obviously this has changed throughout this last couple of years, but this is just keeping those social ties to encourage compliance with the social norms of your neighborhood, what that looks like. If that means asking the kids next door how their day at school went, that is engaging a social interaction. That's letting those kids play with your dog, or having that conversation. If that's bringing cookies next door or hot chocolate, or this is one we don't think of. We think very much, okay, what's happening next door or across the street or when we're in our neighborhood. But how many times have you seen your neighbors at a store, at a school event, and maybe your kids necessarily are the same age, and you've said hi to them? So having those spontaneous interactions with each other in public spaces, not running to the next aisle, not to talk to them, that is not a spontaneous interaction. But I mean, passing them, saying, hi, how are you doing? It looks like you're buying groceries too for the snowstorm. And really having those spontaneous interactions, because there's a good chance if you all live in the same neighborhood, you probably use the same schools, maybe the same faith-based communities, maybe the same gas stations or grocery stores. So making sure you're having those spontaneous interactions. And if your neighborhood has activities, going to those activities. Or if your neighborhood has a park nearby, going to the park and making yourself available to start those relationships. Because you're not going to start those relationships by staying in your house. So making sure you're available to start those social interactions. Because the good news is that friendships reduce the risk of mortality in developing certain diseases and can speed recovery in those who fall ill. And simply reaching out to lonely people can jumpstart the process of getting them engaged with a neighborhood and peers, and really helping them overcome that loneliness. So I'm going to check and see if there's any questions so far in the chat. If not, you.
I'll keep track of the chat here for you, Amber, as best I can. One question here: any studies started on the impact of the pandemic on these numbers?
I know there is research through a couple of the different things I do related to mental health and COVID that have been being researched. So I'm sure there are other elements that are being researched related to loneliness with that as well.
I wondered, even the number you gave about 30% having chronic loneliness, I assumed maybe that was a pre-COVID number.
That is a pre-COVID number.
Wow. Okay.
So, and from what I've seen just on articles so far, the estimate is those numbers will be higher for loneliness and mental health situations.
Another one asked, where did the health benefit percentage impact statistics from the earlier slides come from?
I will let you know when I'm done. It's in my, there was quite a few different research studies. And so I need to go back and ask exactly which one you're talking about. But I do have all of them sourced. So I will get that to you. So some of you might be thinking, okay, she said all these statistics that are very shocking, especially if you've never seen them before. So how do I get to know my neighbor? Because getting to know your neighbor is that first step in making your home safer, but also making your neighborhood safer. So I want to discuss how to make those positive relationships. Now I do want to, if this was in real time and I was writing this on a whiteboard, I would put an asterisk before I go any farther, because I want you to know it doesn't make sense to form relationships just to get people to do what you want to do, or just because you feel you need to, because that won't work. People will feel used. So as community builders, we need to approach relationships with integrity. We need to form relationships because we genuinely like someone, because we have something to offer that person, and because we have a common goal. And most likely in our neighborhood, our common goal is to make our neighborhood safe and welcoming. I'm kind of implying that for everyone, but that would be my goal for my neighborhood. So I just want to keep that thought throughout, because sometimes maybe we think, oh, we can build this relationship to make myself, like that man said in the YouTube video, I just didn't want to look bad. I didn't want to, it was more, I didn't want to make myself look bad versus the reason in the long term why he is doing it now. So steps to building a positive relationship. Build relationships one at a time. There are no shortcuts. You might send out a family newsletter, and that helps keep in touch with a lot of folks, but it's no substitute for getting to know a real person. There are people I send holiday cards to every year, and that is when I connect with them. I'll just come out and say it. But that's not a substitute for going down the street, knocking on the door, and having a conversation. Be friendly and make a connection. This means your words, your smile. This is saying hi, even when you've had a bad day and you're picking up your mail. And try to find something you have in common. Even if they don't like the same sports team, maybe you have the same favorite food or favorite restaurant in the area. Because we all want to have those close connections. with our fellow neighbors and people we're around. So making sure we're making those connections and ask people questions. People love to talk about themselves and about what they think. And if you ask a person about themselves, they may take time to listen attentively, and you can actually become fast friends. I always joke with my husband in our neighborhood because we talk to our fewer neighbors. At least one person has graduated from the high school by our house. But that's always a question that a lot of our neighbors ask because it's finding that commonality, even in the different generations. So asking questions, seeing if they're from the area, can answer, are you new here? Oh, no, I've lived here for 20 years, just on a different side of town. Or, I've lived in a different state until 6 months ago, can really give you an eye-opening idea of how they may be feeling and if they have those social connections here and how you can help play a role. And then tell people about yourself. I always tell participants when I ask questions, I won't ask a question that I won't answer first as the presenter, because people aren't going to trust you unless you're willing to trust them. And so if you ask them 100 questions but never tell anything about yourself, then they're not going to be able to tell if you genuinely care about and what you think. And so they're not going to know, why are they asking me these questions? Tell them, I went to a neighboring class today and it's really got me excited to really make more engagements in our neighborhood. Tell me, how long have you lived in this neighborhood? And start asking those questions and telling them the why and why you're starting to build these relationships. And then go places and do things. I know this is my other slide as well, but this is really a thing to start positive relationships. It can help you make friends. It can help having those extended times that aren't just going to the mailbox or after you've had a stressful day at work and maybe you're not feeling the best to talk to someone for 20 minutes. But on a weekend at a park in your neighborhood, you could talk as long as you wanted. So go places and do things with your neighbors. And that's not all. You would think that would be easy, 5 steps. Nope, there's 6 more. So accept people the way they are. You don't have to agree with them all the time in order to form relationships with them. No one likes to be judged. So being aware you might not see eye to eye on everything. Maybe even neighborhood rules, maybe even on, one might be a cat person, one might be a dog person. That's okay. You can still have relationships. And then assume other people want to form relationships too. Even if they seem crabby or different, or they seem lonely, or they seem negative, you might be able to crack that shell. That might just be on the exterior. If you've ever had a book and you didn't like the cover of the book and said, oh, I'm never going to read that, and then they changed the illustrations on the cover, you had a friend recommend it, and you opened the book and it was actually a really good book. So thinking about, you don't know what the cover's telling you. So ask those questions and really open that book and get to know that person. And then overcome your fear of rejection. Most of us suffer from a fear of rejection. And there's only one thing to do about that. And that's to, I don't want to say get over it, but, just push forward, challenge ourselves. If we want to form relationships, we need to plan on being rejected some of the time. They might not be ready to meet new people. They might, kind of think, why is my neighbor talking to me? I've lived here 10 years and no one in the entire neighborhood has talked to me. But once you get over that fear, you can be deeply rewarded with what you find out in the friendships that you make. And be persistent. People are sometimes shy and suspicious, so it might take a while to win over their trust. So you can always form a relationship if you stick with it. And then invite people to get involved. Maybe they feel like they don't have a space. So if you belong to something in your neighborhood or do an event with some neighbors already, maybe you all have set out in your driveways during this pandemic and shouted across the driveway. Well, maybe there's someone that hasn't done that. Invite them to set out on their driveway. And then enjoy people. If you genuinely enjoy people, others will be attracted to that. And so being aware and having them enjoy with you. So
Amber, that is a great list. We need to come up with a media release or a column or something over that. It's a great reminder list. And I especially wanted to say something about this: be persistent. I have a gentleman that lives just a couple of houses down. My first initial contact with him was probably a year and a half ago, and that lasted about 1 minute, maybe. And getting a wave out of him is about the most that ever happens. A, he's almost never in his yard, but B, he just kind of always looks like he doesn't want to be bothered. Too, that's just kind of the facial image he gives. But I was out yesterday shoveling someone else's driveway, and he saw me and came out, and it was really because of some of these persistent attempts, and he kind of alluded to that, and he came out and talked with me while I shoveled, but he talked for at least 20 minutes. He's a Purple Heart veteran, um, a pretty interesting background, and he just opened up. I barely said two words. I just listened and shoveled mainly. But I think it was because of that being persistent, and then an opportunity just kind of presented itself.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that, David, because I think we all have those stories to share of like with the persistence when it comes
Yes.
to, and you never know when those are going to come about. We, in our neighborhood, we've gotten to know our neighbors a lot better because of actually COVID. Because working from home, we were able to go on more walks, which means we were out more. And so we actually got to talk and get to know our neighbors. And we actually found out one of our neighbors actually lived in our house 20 years ago and just moved into the neighboring neighborhood. So you never know what you will find out. Yes, keep in mind not all people are joiners. I am, but found to be a surprise with the neighborhood that I thought I knew. Some shells are just harder to crack. Yes. And so that actually leads me into questions. So I have a few discussion questions to have us think. Because yes, that list is great. And yes, now we know loneliness is an issue. But there's going to be some things we're going to have to overcome. So my first question to you, and you can unmute your mic or put in the chat, is barriers or concerns about building relationships with neighbors. What are some barriers or concerns you have?
In rural areas, your neighbors aren't always very close. So you've
Yes.
got to take the effort to get there. You're not going to see them. You're going to have to go knock on their door and or call them, do something. That is a big difference out here. I don't see another house from my house.
Also being aware.
Yeah, the need to be really intentional. I think some people sometimes have safety concerns about neighbors, maybe one down the street where the police are visiting a lot, or other things. There can be some legitimate safety concerns.
And I think when it comes to safety concerns, if you have safety concerns, just being aware of what they are and why you have those safety concerns, and maybe taking other routes and connecting with other neighbors. I know we had one neighbor that started a lawn business, and so their first connection was just putting loops on the doorknobs of everyone's house. Didn't actually make direct contact, but kind of that was their way of seeing who they could connect with in the neighborhood.
I live in an urban city in Columbus, Ohio, and I think I'm a renter. I think there's a barrier maybe between homeowners and renters, and the longevity. I think there's probably an assumption amongst homeowners that renters may not be as interested in investing in where they live, or interested in connecting. And what I found, I think that's sometimes the case, but it's certainly not a rule. I found many renters are very, very open and interested to get to know each other and to build a relationship. So I think that mostly stems from the unknown. We're all afraid of sometimes afraid of what we don't know, or people we don't know or what we don't know about those people we don't know.
Yes.
All that, yes.
And I think that's said very well. And it's about learning about that person, not necessarily labeling them. I'm going to use the words you used as the buyers or the renters, but getting to know the person, not how they're obtaining or getting into your neighborhood, but learning about the person and knowing it's okay to make mistakes. You may have to make mistakes as you build a relationship with the person, especially if they're coming from things from different perspectives or from a different place. But knowing that you're learning about the person and not necessarily, but that's a hard, I'm trying to think of the right word, but when that is already there about trying to see them separate, how to bridge that gap of telling everyone, starting these conversations and relationships and kind of getting over that fear of how that would look.
Amber, in one of the comments, someone mentioned political divide. And I guess I might even lump that into the same category as fear that someone posted, some of these other things, because you undoubtedly have neighbors that are not like you, believe it or not.
Yes.
And
So I actually had that listed as a potential question that was going to come up. So I actually have an answer specifically for that. So, yes, we're all going to have different perspectives and thoughts, especially maybe on politics. And first, I want to say is don't be intimidated. We might have different views, but that's not all we have to talk about. You don't need to start off with one of your first questions being, "Who did you vote for?" That might come up through building relationships, and that's fine. But we need to be able to listen and withhold our judgment and know, these are their views, and that's okay. My question is, thinking about, is this affecting your neighborhood? Probably, it's about building that relationship. That relationship is stronger than looking at that very specific question. And this goes also if you have someone of political power living in your neighborhood. You can still be friends with them. You can still talk with them. And just, yes, that might come up. And that goes back to it's okay to make mistakes. It's hard to mend relationships sometimes when those conversations happen and things are said, but just being careful with how you say it, what you're saying, and seeing how that plays a role. But like I said, hopefully that might not be the first question you ask when making connections with your neighbor. But if it does come up, just handling that with grace and knowing that you might see differently and putting yourself in the other person's shoes and seeing from their perspective as well.
You mentioned listening too, Amber. I found listening to be more important than me talking.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you do have a comment, a question in chat. How do you approach and manage relationships with seniors who complain of loneliness but are also verbally abusive? Maybe a curmudgeon like Ove in the book, or Uve.
You gotta, so I'm gonna use the egg analogy. You gotta crack the egg. You gotta find what, they might say they are lonely, but you might think, well, then they will want to talk. And it might be they just want someone to sit there with them. Maybe they're more of an introvert and reader, and they just want someone present. Maybe they had a daughter or a caretaker or someone who came over and now they're no longer with them or they moved away. And finding out why they're the way they are. And maybe it's just leaving a card on their doorstep or, asking if you could feed their animals or shovel their driveway, and kind of a slow relationship and building that trust. And obviously, if it's not safe, take your time if they are being verbally abusive. But just taking it step by step. Because a lot of times we want to go straight into those questions, which is what I told you to do. But if you do come up to some barriers or walls, try to rethink or repicture and put yourself in their shoes. Think, did I used to see someone come over all the time? Or, hey, do they garden? Did I see them gardening last summer? Well, maybe when seeds come out, I'll put a little baskets of seeds on their doorstep, and kind of seeing kind of where their soft spots are. You know, some people enjoy talking to kids or animals way more than adults, and that is okay. But knowing that about the person might be a good thing to know. Because I know there are a lot of people in my neighborhood who much rather just play and talk to my dog than talk with me at first, and that is fine. But being aware of what motivates that person to build that relationship.
And really, it's a process too. It doesn't happen immediately. I have a neighbor down the street who the first several conversations were he had a lot of things to get off his chest, and pretty uh, negative and things. But that's been a 18-month process, and now I've discovered he loves to fish, and frankly I really don't care about fishing myself, but we have lots of fishing conversations, and he has lots of good fishing stories, and they don't evolve into this sort of negative ranting territory that the first couple of conversations did.
Mhm.
And
Right.
he's initiating, so
So,
it's a process. It takes time.
since I am a senior, but I also had care of my mother and her siblings, I'm going to say sometimes I feel that it's the perception of people when they see somebody older. So, my mother's number one and number two sisters were really debilitated physically, but would have loved to have had earlier opportunity to visit with people and realize, like in the case of my mother's oldest sister, she was hard of hearing, she had trouble seeing, so you just have to go very slow. My mother and her immediate siblings were always the cookie handing off, children can come pick flowers in my garden people. But her two older sisters were 10 and 15 years older.
Thank you for sharing that.
So as they went from their 80s into their 90s, it's a deal. So anyway, I'm sorry I have to take this.
I'm seeing a lot in the chat, and sorry if I missed something, but it looks like some are mentioning, making sure neighbors have phone numbers of neighbors and calling. And yes, that's great. I actually have a number to one of my neighbor's sisters, just in case a medical emergency should occur, just so they have someone that they can call and check in and is able to do a well person check if needed. Yes, so seeing if you are a caretaker, making sure neighbors have numbers or numbers to that neighbor that they can check in with. Is there any other barriers or questions on this slide? For sake of time, I'm going to move to the next slide, but I don't want to stop the conversation either. But we've talked a lot about our concerns, but how do we sustain relationships with your neighbor? You might have that big win where, you stop just getting the hand wave and they have a 30-minute conversation with you. That does not mean you can check off the list that you talked to neighbor C and you're good now and you have A, B, and C neighbor. No, we need to sustain these relationships. So how do we sustain relationships with our neighbors? And others made good points, especially if you have neighbors who change out a lot. If you have rotation in your neighborhood that's higher than normal, or maybe you're just an older neighborhood that new people are buying houses, and so you kind of have a unique dynamic in your neighborhood. How do you sustain those relationships?
I would say touch points. The more often you can interact, whether it's waving hello, doing a good deed, the more often you interact, or find little excuses, whether it's bringing them some homemade goodies, baking extra cookies. If you're out mowing your lawn, go ahead and, mow your neighbor's lawn. Just being there, and neighboring doesn't happen unless somebody takes the action to initiate it. So I think we all need to be more proactive to be the change we want to see, to be the good neighbor that we want to have, and that reciprocity will come back.
Yes. I like what you said there, the reciprocity. Yes.
Amber, do you have a tip or rule of thumb, or is there research that says you need
Yes.
X number of positive contacts? Or
I don't have the exact number of positive contacts because that's really going to be dependent. There's a lot of variables to that on the person, on how they want to interact. But to sustain those relationships is pay attention to people. Check in when you need to. This might be a few minutes a week. This might be on different times or places, but pay attention to people. For example, just going to disclose ourselves. We know our cross the street neighbor, but we don't talk to them very often. But they got stuck in the snow yesterday. So my husband went out to help them shovel. And we, to this day, don't remember when we told her where he works. But yesterday she's like, hey, are you still working so-and-so? He's like, yeah, but I've been working at home for a year. But she took the time to remember that and use that as a conversation starter yesterday as he was shoveling the snow. We still don't remember. That could have been a year ago, 6 months ago, because occasionally we'll see them, say hi, have a quick conversation. But she was able to pay attention and remember that information. And then communicate openly. People need to communicate. It's a good idea to set aside time to talk about issues you may be having. Not that you might have issues with your neighbor, but if you were to have an issue, communicating openly about it and not only talking when something is negative or something that you have concern over, but having that open communication and appreciate each other. If your neighbor does something nice that you appreciate, say thank you, or thank you for dropping that off the other day, or thank you for listening the other day when you caught me at a bad time and you just heard everything that just happened at work today. I appreciate that. So appreciating each other. And then extend yourself. Get out of your comfort zone. Go a little out of your way at least once in a while. Whether that's shoveling someone else's driveway, which David did yesterday, or spending a little extra time with someone. Maybe you actually have somewhere to be in 10 minutes, but you could be a little flexible and you give that 10 minutes to your neighbor. Maybe you see them trying to carry something in that's too heavy, or I'm really picturing spring right now with all the snow. So I'm picturing people like carrying in dirt to go to their garden right now, but it could be shoveling snow right now too. And then volunteer to do some work together in your neighborhood. Work together for a common purpose or goal to sustain those relationships, and challenge each other to do better. Have a neighborhood, I don't want to say competition, but how many neighbors do you know, and challenge each other to do better. And then back each other up when things get tough, whether it's the electricity going out. Maybe they are looking for care for their children. Maybe there's that you're needing eggs. That's not really a challenge, but things get tough. Maybe you need 2 eggs to make something and you aren't able to get to the store and asking. And I know we talked about that more rural, you maybe can't see your neighbor, but backing each other up when times get tough. Maybe, needing to help each other out in the area and going to each other's front door and knocking and seeing what issues, if you're having an issue, if they're having a difficult time as well in the community, and really just checking in with each other to sustain those relationships. So with that,
Amber, you mentioned saying thank you, and absolutely that is a great example. And handwritten thank you notes really stand out in the crowd. Chet, who's on this call, sent me one recently. Those are very memorable when people do that, and because it's so uncommon anymore. So certainly handwritten thank you notes or just notes of gratitude to neighbors, I think are great. And then Caroline in chat mentioned a few things they had done, but she also mentioned here, find out people's birthdays and send a card or a comment. And that's that is a great idea. I've not heard anybody say that, but yeah, find
Like
out when
that
your
a
neighbors'
lot.
birthdays are. And that's at least one time a year you have a perfectly legitimate excuse to send them a nice card or note.
Yes.
On the birthday front, I've thought about that. We pre-COVID, we organized once a month casual social meetups and we rotated houses. Host puts out light snacks. It's always BYO. We have name tags. I've thought about the birthday opportunity to celebrate and how we can bring joy to people's lives. And at a monthly meetup, you could celebrate all of the February birthdays. For example, I have a feeling some people might be somewhat hesitant to put their full birthday in a directory for privacy protection, but for the month, I think that'd be a great opportunity to celebrate multiple neighbors.
That is a good idea.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I like the birthday idea a lot. Are there any additional questions about this presentation? David, do you have anything additional to share?
Not specifically about this presentation, but I'll wrap us up.
Okay, sounds good.
Do the stop the share.
Yeah.
There. Yeah. Perfect. Well, one thing that has come up, and I'm going to put this into chat. A few of you have taken our online survey about what you're doing in this space of neighboring and how neighboring has impacted you or what your interest is in neighboring. And I'm throwing that link on there to give you access to that survey again. If you take that, then once a week I check it on that survey and I email out a PDF of what we're calling our Engaged Neighbor packet. It's about 80 pages now, but it includes 4 pages of references, recommended books on this subject and related subjects, as well as articles, information, suggestions, all sorts of helpful information. So that's the way you get access to that publication, is by taking that survey. And if you answered that survey several months ago, drop me a line and I'll send you an updated version of the packet, because it continues to change as we have new presentations or new information becomes available. We add that. Then also just wanted to let you know that this is, the original idea was to do this class like 6 times. But there's been such interest and good feedback that we are going to keep Neighboring 101 going, at least for the rest of this year, 2021, maybe beyond that. We'll continue to meet once a month, have different speakers and different topics. In March, you're actually going to hear from Chet in Ohio, as he's going to present kind of what he's been doing to create a culture of neighboring on his street, urban street in Ohio. But also, I've had some requests, not just about continuing the class, but people wanting to have some time to kind of network and share at the end of these sessions. So that's really what this time is for. Feel free to turn your microphone on and share a little bit about what you're doing in the area of neighboring. We'd love to hear from you. Now, some of you may be more comfortable in just putting something in chat, saying this is my interest, this is kind of what I'm doing. But some of you may also be willing to open a microphone and talk about the topic. And so we'd love to hear both our options. And I think it's great to hear what other people are doing and interested in. So ready, set, go, I guess. Anyone want to share?
I would say, like I did in my chat, that the neighborhood is depending on what people say and what people do, and we talked about that. It sets the framework, and I think they should also include more communication with the cities and the county or wherever municipality you're located in, because people start talking bad about those officials or code enforcement people or something like that, and they don't maybe keep their lawn up or keep their yard or trim anything on their shrubbery, sometimes it looks a mess and that causes problems. And I think that there's more communication between those homeowners and the city or the code enforcement people, or help them, or if they need help doing it, I would even do it because I've done it a couple times. I think that eases a lot of tension and creates a lot of neighborhood positive feeling, cohesive neighborhoods stick together, something like that. So
Yeah.
I think I think this thing could just not be in the neighborhood, but it needs to connect with the people who interact with everybody in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Maybe including law enforcement.
Everybody can have a role to play. And thank you, Roy, for mentioning an aspect of that I know I've shared before about an individual here in Republic whose yard had gotten high, and she was kind of put out because she got turned into law enforcement, and said if her neighbors would have taken the time to know her, they would know she was 8.5 months pregnant, and that her husband was working a second shift job, and she couldn't mow, and the mower was broke. And a better approach would have been for the neighbors to maybe do the mowing or help her with that instead of calling code enforcement. So that's a great example of how to neighbor. I would just add this, though. You
Exactly.
might ask your neighbor before you trim their shrubs and mow their yard. Just make sure it's okay. Because I actually had a lady that had not such a good experience, but she went over and trimmed the shrubs without asking, which was
Yeah, exactly.
probably not the right thing to do.
That's not the right way to approach it, no. But I was on the homeowners association for 15 years, and I know that's not the right thing to do, but you want to communicate with people when you're making changes and improvement in entrance ways. And so if you got a landscaping issue, you want to make the neighborhood look nicer, have a meeting, run it past them. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Are you doing some work here in this space that we're calling neighboring, either with an organization or in your own community?
Yes, David, this is
Yes.
Darlene. We are meeting with our Betterment Council in our little town out here in Mount Vernon, and they are very excited about starting some projects that would be citywide, also would be involving our city manager and various things of that type, like was just mentioned by Roy. We also have a retired judge who sits on the Betterment Council, and he said, I have had to write up so many articles and so many things. He's an excellent wordsmith, and he will be putting articles in our paper on exactly what Amber just talked about. How do you make better neighbors? How do you become better neighbors? And so going into this year of 2021, that's one of our goals, is to do that. The other thing is we have a group here in Mount Vernon who went on their own over to our Walmart, and we have a small super center. And they said, we have a lot of families in our area that really struggle to have groceries on the table. When you have groceries that come to the end of their date, whether it's produce, you just feel like they could be used over the next 4 to 5 days, but they just won't sell. Also, even some meat, rotisserie chicken, they'll freeze it right at the end date, and they come home, and we have been distributing these groceries to families in the area where there is true need. And that's been a very neighborly thing in our area. And we give a huge shout out to Walmart for doing that, because that means their people have to sort through as they, restock. They take those things that they may have just tossed and they purposely put them aside for the team that goes to Walmart. And it's the same team that goes every single week. Nobody just goes on their own, but the same team goes to Walmart week after week. And so they've built a good relationship there. And that has been so exciting to watch.
Yeah, tremendous example. That's wonderful. And I'm looking forward to being in Mount Vernon, with the weather permits, next month and visiting
Well,
with
we're hoping it's a better time.
Yes, we do too. Visiting with the Betterment Association there. Great example.
David, just in my Federated Garden Clubs, we set up sort of a chain to get hold of each other throughout this COVID itself, but then really now with the cold. And so I feel that those women have always been a blessing, but it's been interesting. I took the initiative to get hold of people I don't normally get hold of throughout the course of time because of this. Some of the newer people, and then also some people from other clubs. So I think what I found is this kind of universal feeling like this long pause has given them insight into neighbors. Me moving during COVID, I'm the only person in this 3 blocks that does not have a spouse. So the only people I normally see outside are men in the front. That's been a very different thing for me. First was moving into town, then moving again within the city. And, this is a really nice neighborhood, friendly, they wave, walking, I did meet neighbors, but I see no women outside at all.
Right.
Kind of a deal.
Yes.
Looking forward to potential garage sale, maybe. So.
A lot of books, and a lot more conversation about front yard living. People have used different techniques for that, turquoise tables and front yard Fridays. And I know when our kids were small, just letting them play in the front yard in the evening with us became a magnet for other people to be here. But front yard living is a good way to meet neighbors, and you alluded to that as well. So great example. Anybody else today? Love hearing from you and love seeing things in chat. I know someone shared a link to AARP Community Challenge Grant that might be a resource for some of you. Well, we'll keep the dialogue and conversation going month to month. You'll continue to get emails from me that will remind you of the next class, but also contain follow-up information. And you have my email from those if I can be of help in any way, help make connections or have further conversations, would love to do that. And likewise, since Chet's one of our speakers next month, I'm certainly open to having others present as part of this class, because there are some great examples of what people are doing within their community and within other organizations that are opportunities for all of us to learn from. So if you feel inclined to do something like that, I'd love to hear from you as well. And we'll keep this going. If there's no other questions, we'll close for the day. Appreciate your feedback on our presentation today. It looks like it was educational and helpful for folks, and glad to see that was the case. I'm sure Amber would be glad to entertain questions from others if necessary as well. I'll include her contact information in the follow-up email to today's session. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's good to hear your voice.
Amber, I'll do another follow-up survey, of course, but and I know we had a few people drop off there at the end, but at least the ones that were still on, looks like you hit the ball well today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me and thinking about the connection.
Very timely. And I'm serious, man. A lot of what you shared, I'm like, I'm taking notes. I'm going to need to watch this again because this is a great topic for a media release or a column or something on our
Yeah, and
extension
I was thinking
website.
about doing an article on some of the stuff.
Yeah.
It's on my list.